Lightning stitched across a black Texas sky, and the herd answered with a low, steady moan that became motion. One steer bolted, then 10, and suddenly 1,000 hooves hit hardpan in one direction. Men were already in their saddles, bedrolls flying, hands grabbing night ropes and spurring into the dark. Coffee hissed where it splashed the fire. Someone yelled, "Turn 'em!" And the shout disappeared under thunder and the drum of cattle. Horses surged to flank the leaders, riders leaning into the wind, hats yanked low, slickers snapping, a mouthful of dust, a flash of horns, and the sick thought of barbed wire somewhere ahead. The way to kill a stampede was to bend it into a circle before hooves met steel or the lip of a wash. Men sang to steer the panic. Soft, steady tunes a longhorn would follow the way it followed water. The herd began to arc. A quarter-mile out, the chuck wagon lantern swung like a lighthouse in a storm. That was trail life on the Great Western, the road that carried Texas cattle north to railheads and open grass from the late 1860s into the 1880s. It wasn't a single line on a map so much as a set of choices that hardened into habit after the Civil War, when Texas pastures were full of longhorns and the North was hungry for beef. A steer worth a few dollars on the Nueces could bring 20 in Kansas. The math made the risk look sane. Crews pulled together in spring when the grass jumped. A trail boss hired roughly a dozen hands for 2,000 to 3,000 head, plus a cook and a wrangler, and set the brand list. The Goodnight-style chuck wagon, born when Charles Goodnight rebuilt an army wagon, carried flour, beans, coffee, salt pork, dried fruit, a coffee mill, tools, and sourdough. The remuda, 50 to 100 head, gave each hand 4 to 6 mounts to swap through the day. Wages ran $30 to $40 a month. A boss might take 100. Most hands were young, teens into their early 20s, half broken by the first week and leathered by the first month. They pushed north at a walk, 10 to 15 miles when grass and water allowed. Night guards circled the bedded herd 2 at a time, swinging wide in the dark and singing to keep cattle calm. The songs were not for show. They smoothed a nervous night. Any noise could pop a herd: lightning, a wolf's bark, a hat blown off and slapping a flank. A stampede could kill quicker than a bullet. Horses stepped into holes and went end over end. Herds slammed into draws. The surest rider could vanish under hooves in seconds. Rivers set the tempo. A good crossing started shallow. A bad one hid quicksand or a sudden drop. Point men broke current. Drags shoved the tail through mud, and everything stayed wet for days. The Western found shape in the 1870s. Earlier, the Shawnee and then the Chisholm carried herds toward Kansas. As railways pushed west and quarantine laws against Texas fever closed older routes, crews swung through the Panhandle and Indian Territory toward Dodge City and Ogallala, then on to Wyoming and Montana grass. John T. Lytle is often credited with giving the Western its long reach north in 1874. On the Red River, drovers aimed for Doan's Crossing, near a store opened by Corwin Doan in 1878, a place for supplies and hard advice. From there, the road bent past the Canadian and Cimarron toward Fort Dodge and the rails at Dodge City. Farther on, the South Platte led to Ogallala. Some outfits pushed on to Cheyenne and Miles City. Indian Territory was not empty. The Cherokee outlet charged fees for passage. Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and others moved through the same country. Sometimes a herd paid a toll in cash or cattle. Sometimes a drive hired scouts who knew water and grass. Sometimes there was trouble. Facts stayed plain. Drovers moved through someone else's land, and those nations had a say. Rustlers watched the trail. A small band could cut out a dozen head on a moonless night. Bosses counted at water and sent riders for strays, but law was thin and patchy, and cow towns balanced money with mayhem. Routine kept men alive. The cook was first up and last down. saving beans when wind shifted and guarding the sourdough like payroll. Noon meant a quick bite where the wagon could reach. Evening meant a ring of bedrolls and a sky bright with stars. Men learned each horse's humor, each partner's breaking point, and the way a herd could move like a single animal when the point men picked the right line. Money made the miles. A herd bought for $4 a head in Texas and sold for 20 up the line could pay wages, freight, and loss and still leave a profit. Loss was constant. Bad crossings, late northers, dry stretches, and fever-tick rules that shoved openings west as rails pushed deeper into Texas. Then barbed wire, patented in 1874, spread from fence lines across the plains. Wire protected crops and water. It also turned a night run into a slaughter if a herd hit it at speed. More and more, the old paths closed. By the early 1880s, the Western was a highway for horn and muscle. Dodge City called itself the Queen of the Cow Towns. Ogallala wore Gomorrah of the Plains. North of there, open-range outfits swelled with outside capital, Scottish syndicates, Boston money, betting on grass, and mild winters. The winter of 1886 to 87 smashed those bets. Blizzards and deep cold killed herds by the hundreds of thousands. Many outfits failed. The drives didn't cause that winter, but the system they fed buckled and the business changed. The men who rode the Western were working hands, not the slick gunmen of later dime novels. They were black, white, and Mexican vaqueros whose roping and horsemanship shaped the job, and native riders who knew the country better than any map. A significant share of crews were black after the Civil War, often a quarter. Spanish terms filled the work: remuda, lariat, cinch, chaparreras. Gear followed function. A slicker was rain gear. A $40 month felt like a fortune on payday and a memory by the time a man left Dodge. What held them wasn't romance. It was a paycheck and the pride of finishing a hard job well. A boss who brought in his herd sound, with the brand book squared and the count near what he started, earned the next contract. A cook who kept coffee hot and beans right was worth keeping. A hand who stayed inside the bend of a run and kept singing when his throat burned was the kind others followed through the worst weather. The Western left marks you can still walk, Doan's crossing on the red, faint ruts where soil stayed unplowed, and museum chuck boxes with coffee mills and Dutch ovens that still look ready to work. By the late 1880s, the long drives belonged mostly to memory. Fences, law, and steel narrowed the work. Cattle still walked, but not across whole territories. The Western had done its job, moved millions of beeves north, fed rail cars and stockyards, and stamped a rhythm on the plains that lasted a generation. It cost men their lives at rivers, under hooves, at the wrong end of a bottle in a town that didn't love strangers, and on winter trails that froze breath mid-sentence. It also taught skills that stayed, reading weather off a horizon, finding water where others saw glare, and turning panic into a circle in the dark. Stand in a panhandle wind, and it's easy to see why the first lines of wire meant more than property. They were a boundary the old rhythm couldn't cross. That night, the riders bent the run and held it. By dawn, the cattle stood with heads low, and the cook banged his spoon for coffee. Then they moved out again, 10 miles north, following a road that felt endless, until it wasn't. Thank you for listening to Deserted Trails. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the old frontier.